Hey everybody, I thought I would make one more Anubis video. I usually like to jump around from topic to topic, but some information has come up I thought I'd share with you. As with a lot of my videos, sometimes I run across information in later on reading that I wish I would have looked at before I did my original upload, or in the Anubis case, uploads. But first of all, the picture on the screen is a picture that was sent to me by Danny Wilten. It's always nice when your videos get supported by ideas from other channels, and it's especially nice when they get supported by a channel of the caliber of Danny Wilten's. I'd like to say I appreciate this a lot, and thanks very much to Danny. But as you can see here, he put together side-by-sides of the original of the Sphinx and what it may have looked like in its original form as Anubis. And the head is definitely much more in proportion to its body on the right with the dog head on it, and the Egyptians always had their proportions right. They were very much sticklers about that. But the most important thing about this video is a certain detail on the back here. And as you can see here on the back, the tail matches up with this very common depiction of Anubis from ancient Egypt. And as many of you know, Danny is good at making comparative analysis, and what he did here is just highlight the back end of the Sphinx, and it matches up with the ancient Egyptians' depiction of Anubis. As you can see, the way the tail curls up from behind is identical on the Sphinx monument as it is on the ancient Egyptians' depiction of Anubis. I think that is very important, and I think that is something that cannot be ignored. And a couple days after Danny sent me this picture, I started reading my Fingerprints of the Gods book by Graham Hancock. I just wanted to refresh myself on the chapter called the Osiris Numbers, and I came across some interesting information, and I kind of scolded myself for not referencing this book in the first place. Since this book is a very, very important book on ancient history, and anybody that's read it, I'm sure, agrees with that. Mr. Hancock says this business of the dog or jackal. The subtle way the shadowy canine slings from myth to myth is peculiar, stimulating, then baffling you, always luring you onwards. And that's what this information did. It kind of lured me onwards and wanted me to investigate just a little bit more. And in the chapter entitled, Are There Any Secrets Left in Egypt?, Mr. Hancock says this. He talks about his visit to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo in December of 1993. He says, still perched astride his casket, but now locked away in a dusty display case, Anubis held my attention for a long, quiet moment. His effigy had been carved out of stuccoed wood, entirely covered with black resin, then painstakingly inlaid with gold, alabaster, calcite, obsidian, and silver, material used to particular effect in the eyes, which glittered watchfully with an unsettling sense of fierce and focused intelligence. And he goes on to say this. He says, it was tempting, too, to wonder whether there was any significance in the fact that in ancient times Anubis had been referred to by Egyptian priests as the guardian of the secret and sacred writings. Under the grooved edge of the gilded casket on which the effigy now crouched was found an inscription, and it said this, initiated into the secrets. Alternative translations of the same hieroglyphic text rendered it variously as he who is upon the secrets and he who is guardian of the secrets. And I think that is very important. And Mr. Hancock also said this about the very ancient town of Abydos. He said the original god was always represented as a member of the dog family, usually lying recumbent on a black standard. And I think that is very important when you can link something to Abydos, because Abydos, if you know anything about Egypt, is definitely one of the most ancient towns in all of Egypt and seems to hold many secrets in there. And if the Sphinx was originally carved, if you don't listen to Egyptologists and you listen to people that know what they're talking about, and use evidence to back up what they say, the Sphinx was definitely carved well before the standard model of history says it was, around 2500 BC. So anytime you can link it to one of these ancient towns, I think that is very important also. And if you listen to people who really put their time in Egypt, like John Anthony West, they say the Sphinx was carved many thousands of years ago, and possibly during what they called the first time in Egypt. And Mr. Hancock talks about the first time, and he talks about the gods such as Osiris, Isis, Nephthys, Horus, and Anubis. He says, in addition, other companies of gods were recognized, notably at Memphis and Hermopolis, two very ancient towns, and they were very important in the very ancient cults dedicated to Ptah and Thoth. And that is very important, taking the importance of Anubis way back to this first time when people such as John Anthony West say that the Sphinx was built. And finally, Mr. Hancock says this. He says, before leaving Abydos, there was one other puzzle that I wanted to remind myself of. It lay buried in the desert about a kilometer northwest of the Osirion, and the Osirion is one of those very ancient sites that was found buried deep down, obviously much more ancient than the stuff found on top of the sand. He says, a cross littered with rolling, cluttered turmoil of ancient graveyards. Among these cemeteries, many of which dated back to early dynastic and pre-dynastic time, the jackal gods Anubis and Upawat had traditionally reigned supreme. Openers of the way, guardians of the spirits of the dead, I knew they had played a central role in the mysteries of Osiris that had been enacted each year at Abydos, apparently throughout the span of ancient Egyptian history. It seemed to me that there was a sense in which they guarded the mysteries still. For what was the Osirion, if not a huge unsolved mystery that deserved closer scrutiny than it had received from the scholars whose job it is to look into these matters? So, all that I've read from Mr. Hancock, he doesn't tie it in directly to the Sphinx, but the importance of it in these most ancient towns in Egypt, would they have made the Sphinx Anubis in its original form? From everything I've read, it was important enough that they just may have. So, I thought that information from Mr. Hancock in his book Fingerprints of the Gods was definitely important, worth passing on. Though he doesn't tie it in directly to the original Sphinx, what he does do is make it clear that Anubis was very important, and very important to the oldest towns in Egypt, and he ties it into the first time, what is known as Zeptepi, a time when people such as John Anthony West say the Sphinx was probably built in. And up at the top, the tail, it looks like the common depiction of Anubis. The way it curls up, the Sphinx could have changed many times over the course of history, and we just kind of have a remnant of the original form, but from what we can see, it definitely looks like Anubis. So, I just thought that was very cool. I want to thank Danny again for sending me this pic. He's got his own work going on, and he took time out to send it. I thought that was very cool. Hope you thought this was interesting. This should be my last Anubis upload. Hope you all have a nice week. Take care.